Hello and welcome, Dwayne Huff, founder and creator of Band Leadership Seminars and Band Leadership Online. And in this video, I want to talk about what has been a hot topic with band directors and students for as long as I've been doing this. And I didn't really realize how important it was until I was having an interview with a band director the other day, and he kept on bringing it up and emphasizing that this was huge, this was major, and that we needed to continuously reinforce this. And then I received an email from another student asking the same question, so I figured it's time to really dive deep into this subject of practicing. Now, I'm just gonna be honest with you and say that even to this day, starting back whenever I was a student, all the way through high school and college, throughout my early professional years of playing as a musician, and even to this day, I hate to practice, but I love to perform. And unfortunately, it's one of those necessary evils. I actually met a guy not long ago. His name is Milo, and he's a guitar player, and he loves to practice. And it blew me away, because when he first told me that, I'm like, nah, come on, man, you can't possibly love to practice. He's like, no, I genuinely love to practice. And we got into it, and it just blew me away about how much he did. But for the rest of us who don't necessarily like to practice, but know that we need to be effective, especially as student leaders, setting the example, I wanted to share a few things with you that have helped me and others practice successfully, even when we don't feel like it, right? And I will go back to it and say it this way. I don't know if you're watching this and you're someone who exercises on a regular basis. Maybe you're an athlete, maybe you have an exercise program and you exercise. I wasn't until about a year ago, actually. Long story, but a year ago, I decided to take control of my health and fitness, and I started an exercise and eating plan that I still carry on to this day. I dropped 27 pounds in 60 days, and I've been able to keep most of that off. Now, Lent's coming up, and I'm going to refine my eating habits and get back on track, because I've got about 10 pounds that I need to take off, but it's cool. I know how to do it. And the reason I tell you this is because when you look back over your practice, you know how to do it. In many cases, you know what's going to make practicing successful, but many times we need a refresher and a reminder. And so I got an email the other day from a student, and specifically the student was asking me, I'm having a challenge being and staying motivated to practice. Do you got anything? Can you help me out? And so here's what I shared with that student, and what I'd like to share with you as well. The first thing is, and this helped me tremendously, you got to understand, I started playing my instrument not because I wanted to be in band, but because I loved the saxophone. And that love of the saxophone compelled me to want to pick it up, to play it, and to be part of the band. I started watching saxophone players on music videos years before I started playing the saxophone. So by the time the opportunity presented itself, I was ready to go. I was in love with the instrument. And so the first thing I would say is if you're not in love with your instrument, and you don't just absolutely love the instrument you're playing, chances are you might need to find another instrument if you're going to be effective with your practicing. The second thing is this: if you do love your instrument, or you like your instrument a lot and you want to stay on that instrument, the next thing you need to do is you need to find a musician, a professional musician. Find the recordings of someone that you absolutely love listening to. It can be in the concert space or the classical musical space. It can be in jazz. It can be in rock and roll. It can be in whatever genre that you love. And find that person that you love to listen to, and constantly be feeding your ears with that person. And it might not just be one person. For me, I love listening to, on the saxophone, I love listening to Paquito D'Rivera. I love listening to Dexter Gordon as I was growing up as a saxophone player. John Coltrane, Joshua Redman, Branford Marsalis, and the list goes on and on and on. And as I was coming up as a musician, jazz was my thing, marching band, but then that would end and concert and jazz band season would come up, and I just absolutely fell in love with jazz bands. So I was listening to big bands all the time. I was listening to jazz musicians all the time, not even just saxophone players, but jazz musicians, because that's kind of where I was. You know, and that might not be your thing. You might like another type of music, and that's fine, but find somebody who plays really well on your instrument, because when you listen to that over and over again, it's going to inspire you to want to be like that musician. Now, the catch-22 here is that if you depend too much on that, you might get frustrated when you go into the practice room and realize how far you have to go before you can sound like that person. But you got to trust the process. The practicing process will get you there, you know. Another thing to keep in mind with that vein is simply this. All the time, energy and effort that you invest in the practice room of focused, consistent effort is going to pay off huge. And the beautiful thing is it's going to develop your muscle memory. And a lot of the things you dedicate your time, energy, and effort to is going to seem frustrating because you're practicing scales and you're practicing your basics and you're practicing arpeggios, or you're reading the same piece of music, or you're learning patterns if you're playing jazz. And it can seem so overwhelming that you've got all of this information still left to go, or all of these ideas you still have to practice, and you realize you got to practice them in all 12 keys, or learn all 12 of your major scales, and you realize there's 12 minor scales, and just you can get overwhelmed. But what you need to realize is that if you'll focus on one thing at a time and give it your absolute best and your absolute all, it creates muscle memory and it's going to stay with you. There's a couple of licks that I play in jazz that I can remember spending months trying to play and trying to learn how to play. And I don't practice my saxophone on a regular basis anymore just because of my schedule and my travel schedule and what I do with band leadership seminars and all the other things that I do. But when I pick up my horn to practice or to go play a gig, some of the stuff that I had practiced for months is still there in my fingertips, and I can continue to play that so it stays. And you've seen this too if you're just fresh out of marching band season, or maybe if you're 6 months removed from marching band season. I bet that you can pick up your instrument and you can actually play some of the music, if not all of the music, from memory that you played during your marching band season. Some of you might even be able to march your show. The reason is because that time, that effort, and that energy that you dedicated to the process of learning that, again, not only stays in your mind, but stays in your muscles. If you know your major scales, many of you can play your major scales without even thinking about it, from the bottom of your horn to the top of your horn and anything in between. Maybe you have patterns, maybe you have arpeggios, maybe you have other scales that you can play. You've seen this in practice, so go into the practice room with a mindset that this is not a waste of my time. This is cumulative. This is going to build. And even though you might not be motivated to practice or like to practice, or be inspired to practice, know that it's going to pay off, and getting in there and doing it is going to pay off long term. Another thing that I would say that's really helped me as I've created a practice routine whenever I was coming up in high school and college, and even when I go back to doing it today, is something one of my band directors shared with me that just stuck with me. He said, Dwayne, if you have very little time to practice, don't go into the practice room practicing stuff you already know, because that's just a waste of your time. Rather, if you have a challenging piece of music for concert band or jazz band or even marching band, take that piece of music into the practice room, sit down and circle the areas that are giving you the most challenge. Do your warm-up. If you're practicing for 30 minutes, do 5 minutes of warm-up and then practice the rest of the time. But go down in the practice room with the music circled. Take your metronome, slow it down, and isolate one section at a time. And methodically and proactively practice that until you can build the tempo up on that particular piece. And what you're going to find is when you go back to the rest of the music and put it in, that you can play it as well as you can the rest, because you didn't waste your time playing what you already knew. You spent time practicing things that were giving you a challenge, and that helps you to achieve more in the practice room whenever you have the limited time. Which builds on the next one, which is simply this: find some consistent time to practice. You might only be able to practice for 15 minutes a day with your schedule the way it is, and I challenge you that you probably have more, but start there. And then build in 5-minute increments until you get to 30 minutes a day. Maybe take one day off, maybe two. There's that old saying that says if you miss practicing for 1 day, nobody knows. If you miss practicing for 2 days, you know. If you miss practicing for 3 days, your band director knows. And if you miss practicing 4 days, everybody knows. And so you know what I mean by that. Be consistent in your practice routine, even if it's only 15 minutes. Take that burden and that pressure off of yourself that you have to spend hours practicing every single day. Ultimately, if you're going to be a professional musician, Or if you're going to play on a significant level, you're going to have to dedicate 2 to 3 hours a day practicing. Back whenever I was coming up, they said 6 to 7 hours a day practicing, and that's ridiculous. If you're focused, 2 to 3 hours a day in practicing can get it done, but don't let that overwhelm you. Start with what you have. Another thing in the practice routine, here's what I would say. From my own personal experience, I was constantly fighting a battle in my practice routine between what I liked to play and what I knew I should practice. And I'll give you the perfect example whenever I was in college. And looking back, this is where I'm going to give you this insight from. Looking back, I'm just going to take a jazz musician's perspective here for a second. And this applies to marching band music, this applies to concert music, because it's divided discipline, right? Many of the greatest jazz musicians in the world are very good classical music players. Why? Because it builds dexterity, it builds ability, and it helps them to be more precise in their instrument. But I had the challenge of I didn't really care for that type of music. It didn't intrigue me, it didn't excite me, and I did it out of necessity. I was getting a degree in music performance, and if I didn't do it, I wouldn't get my degree. So I was kind of forced in to do it. And what I would find is that I would spend more time practicing that stuff and just hating and dreading it than I would practicing jazz or the things that I liked or tunes that I liked. You know, there's tunes that I used to listen to back in the 1980s, back in the 1980s when I was playing, that I loved the music and I loved what they were playing, but I have still to this day never learned that music. And my advice to you is simply this: start your practice. The first 5, 10, 15 minutes of your practice session, playing what it is you love and what you want to play. Maybe there's music on the radio that you hear. Maybe there's one of your favorite musicians play something. You want to imitate it and emulate it. I would suggest spending the first part of your practice session doing just that. Do not forsake the music that you love, the music that inspires you, the music that you want to play, because it's the reason you started playing in the first place. And here's what's going to happen. You spend the first 5, 10, 15 minutes of your practice time playing music that you love. Before you know it, you're in the zone. And you've created this momentum, and you're actually excited to be practicing. And then you can take that momentum, that passion, that excitement, and that energy that has motivated you. Hello. And then you can spend the rest of the time practicing the things that you have to practice. Or experiment with it and flip-flop that. Dedicate yourself to practicing the stuff that you don't necessarily like to practice up front when you're fresh, so you have a little bit more focus and momentum, and reward yourself by spending the last 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes playing the stuff that you do love. So experiment and see which one motivates you the best. So just remember, the things that you do in the practice room are cumulative, and they are going to last. A lot of things that you just really spend a lot of time and effort and energy and angst trying to perfect, know that it's going to stay with you because that muscle memory happens. And here's what's going to happen. If you create that consistent practice schedule, it's just like a workout routine. You're going to come in there, and your day, you're going to anticipate it. You're going to look forward to it. You're going to feel bad if you don't do it, but it's got to be, you've got to create that momentum. You've got to create a habit, and that habit comes from creating consistency. And at the end of the day, since this is band leadership seminars and band leadership online, this is the most important part of this. As an effective leader, whether you have a title or not, if you're going to be a leader, an effective leader of your peers, and serve in your band program, it is absolutely essential that you pick up your horn on a consistent basis and practice, and not be necessarily the best musician in the band, though you should strive to do that, but be the very best musician that you can be. Because when you are, you're more equipped to help other people and to serve other people in practicing their music, and they naturally look at you as a respected or respectable person and leader that they want to ask questions, they want to follow, they want to listen to. So whenever you find yourself in marching band season, you have a certain command, a certain energy, a certain authority that you didn't have to push upon anybody. But it's just there because of the example you set all year long. So I hope that served you. And remember, until we talk again, you can inspire superior performance. You've just got to set the example. Practice consistently and show up every day. By the way, if you have not, subscribe to the channel, the YouTube channel, so you'll be aware whenever I post new videos that will serve you. And I'm gonna put it down here, youtube.com/band leadership if you're not watching there, and facebook.com/band leadership for our fan page. I post content in both of those places. And if you haven't already signed up for my free 3-part video series that has become now a 5-part video series plus a leadership assessment, run over to bandleadership.net and put your name and email address in there, and I'll send it right over to you. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.